Go Catch a Goose. Chapter 14. Ochako and Deku made their way around the second-floor balcony, past an information desk to a white marble lobby where he tapped his security card for the elevator. The doors pinged open as he tucked it back into his wallet. Shopping for someone else's baby on a first date hadn't been something Ochako could have imagined. Not that she'd ever imagined a date with Deku could happen at all, but the baby clothes and toys were all so cute, the detour had been surprisingly fun. He'd probably bought too much stuff, with the total checkout price being significantly higher than if he'd restrained himself to one overpriced yukata, but Ochako figured maybe when you had money to spare, generosity was a good approach. Now they were on the elevator, a bag from Baby Bonanza sitting on the floor between them, finally heading to the picnic he'd planned. 45 minutes to get there, somewhere out of the city, had he said? Maybe it was a park in the suburbs, since it'd take at least that long to get out of Tokyo. She turned to him to ask, but as soon as she opened her mouth, found the question vanish from her mind. Deku had stuffed the mask and cap into the shopping bag, and the smile he sent her way was like the first day of summer vacation. His skin had tanned from warm days of the sun, and his freckled cheeks, pinched with excitement, were ready for neighborhood expeditions and cannonballs into the pool. His grin had a warmth and childlike sweetness. And Deku's eyes. She'd already been looking at his eyes, seen nothing but his eyes the whole afternoon, and yet she couldn't look away. Without the hero career, Deku wasn't tall or handsome enough to be scouted for a fashion magazine, and his freckles gave the vibe of goofy kid from next door. But he smiled better than anyone she knew. Ochiko's chest swelled and squeezed. It wasn't like the disguise had hidden his face for a decade. It'd only been an hour or so, but with just the two of them in the elevator, did it mean that he was smiling at her? The thought was Ochiko's cue to tuck her head to the side. She had better not look too long, or she'd start to take it personally. She knew she wasn't special to him. That smile was for everyone. She couldn't dream of that. Deku had his own life, and she had hers. He didn't see her as anything more than a friend, and she couldn't go ruining their friendship because she couldn't control her feelings. Her feelings for him were... The thought ran dry as Ochako found the strap of her bag slick with sweat, and she heard her own voice in her head, like the screech of brakes before the crash. "What are you doing? Stop bothering him. Don't get any stupid ideas. Deku doesn't like you like that." She'd repeated the same warnings over and over in her head for at least 3 years, so why not now? Seeing him smile brought out the automated response. The voice whispered to her with a little nudge, "This isn't anything special," every time he sent her a message, or when she met him in person, it bit down with scathing insult. "Grow up and get over it already. This is embarrassing." The self-admonitions were doing their best to correct her course and send her in the proper direction, away from him. But it wasn't true. She'd been wrong the whole time. He did like her. He asked her out on a date, and he'd been so nervous about it the whole time. It didn't feel real, though. Not yet. Ochako had that weird feeling again. She'd been okay for 10 minutes distracted shopping for the baby, and when she saw him smile, it all came back. Her heart beating hard against her ribs, a flutter in the stomach, and pressure in the ears until they popped. She was suspended between two realities, the one where there was nothing special between her and Deku, wrong but simple. She'd adapted to putting her feelings in a box, and this new thing that felt weird and uncertain, but it was supposed to be real. Somehow, in this place, it was okay for her to fall in love. She liked being here with him, liked seeing him smile, and when they were busy for this reason or that, she missed him. That might be okay now, but it wouldn't sink in. I probably should have asked earlier, but... Deku now gave a more cautious smile. "Are you all right with going in the helicopter?" "Helicopter?" Ochako blinked, once at him and twice more at the display where the floor numbers ticked up into the 40s. Oh. Popping ears was not a nervous response. "Wait, I thought we were going down to the parking garage. Driving!" The elevator slowed as they passed floors 56, 57, and 58, and the doors opened into the VIP roof lounge at the new Tokyo Peaceful Banking Center. The helicopter was visible through the great glass windows, painted his signature green with a bold Deku blazoned in red across the body of the aircraft. Ochiko stared, no longer in disbelief, but wide-eyed like the workings of the universe had been spelled out before her. Deku was serious. She was nervous enough already. A date with him, taking off in a helicopter, was too much to take. Ochiko covered her mouth as a hiccup popped out, then a sputter, and finally a full laugh that gripped her sides. Really? You're serious? You thought... Ochiko could hardly catch her breath to finish the sentence. Since it's a date, let's go in the helicopter? Why? Where in the world are we going? It's an island, he started, to be abruptly cut off by Ochiko's giggles. An island, she sputtered, covering her mouth. Sorry. They had the lounge to themselves. Fancy-looking sofas, tables, armchairs, and a view of the city. Urban development extended all the way to the horizon, even on the roof of a 58-story building. Most importantly, no onlookers were around to pressure Ochiko to contain her laughter, and out it came. Now Deku laughed too, in a mix of nerves, excitement, and a hint of pink in his face. It's not too far off the coast from here. I visited filming a commercial last year in the spring, and I think you'll like it. It's pretty. Deku stepped inside to set the bag from Baby Bonanza on one of the sofas. I'm sure there's somewhere closer we could have gone to, but I didn't have much time to research, so I more or less went with the first thing that came to mind. This was the first thing that came to mind? Ochiko gawked at him. We don't need to go to an island in a helicopter. We could go anywhere. You wear one of your disguises and we'd get ramen or pizza or something like we usually do. Yeah, that's what we usually do, and it's always fun too, so maybe next time. He agreed, and looked to her, stiff with anticipation. But I wanted today to be different. What do you say? Ochiko was reeling. What was there to say? Deku, this is not normal. A helicopter waiting on the roof to take you on a date? Though she couldn't say needing a disguise to get pizza or ramen was normal either. Getting ranked #1 hero before high school graduation was not normal. The whole world had eyes on him, watching expectantly. What about dating him would be remotely normal? Ochiko took a deep breath and swallowed. I guess I'll have to go. Deku lit up like she'd plugged in the Christmas tree. I thought you'd say so. There would be no restrooms on the 45-minute flight to the island, so they split to use the facilities before taking off. She felt a tug at the separation. Every emotion turned up to the max. One weird feeling for being with him, and another for spending a minute alone in the bathroom. The women's room was styled red and silver like a luxury hotel, with fresh flowers and free travel-sized mouthwash. Ochiko's hand slipped, reaching for the soap, resulting in a squirt on the marble countertop and a bottle tipping over into the sink. It took a good minute to fish it out. The container was some sort of slippery polished stone, and her grip was slick under the running water. Her fingers and hands trembled like she'd jumped in an ice bath. When she'd washed her hands and wiped up the extra soap, her leg bones had dissolved into jello. Ochiko leaned onto the counter to brace herself and cool down. She wanted this, and it wasn't going to be normal. Dating Deku was no joke. The thought had been drowned in the swell of nerves and emotion, needing a helicopter ride to an island to spell out the obvious. Ochiko's normal life ended when her relationship went public. Her whole identity would be attached to him. Forget being Ochiko Uraraka, or pro-hero Uravity, or simply another human being. What people would see was Deku's girlfriend. Already, she'd learned to be careful about mentioning that she knew him. Wow, you know him? She'd heard the first few times she talked about him, before the resulting gossip caught up with her. Wow, that girl was obnoxious, bragging about meeting a famous hero who probably had nothing to do with her. Nowadays, if asked about meeting him at UA, she told the story so that he was the star and she was the girl in the background. But if she was his girlfriend, the story changed. More than anything she'd ever said or done, every new person she met would see her as a piece of him. She currently had a bullet point bio on the official Hero Wiki, and you'd bet that dating Deku was more important than Gunhead Agency, pro-hero, UA alum. The list sounded less like accomplishments and more like minimal qualifications to be in the same room as him. Like, to be dating him, she needed to work for a big agency, have her name under major rescue operations, get plastic surgery, and lose 5 kilograms or she'd ruin his reputation. But she was letting her thoughts run off when someone was waiting for her. Ochako settled down with a few breaths and headed out to the landing pad, sure to smile like she'd been thinking about how much fun today would be. Deku introduced her to the pilot outside. Matsumoto had flown helicopters in the military for 13 years and now flew for hero support. Ochako pretended her heart didn't jump as, for the first time in her life, Deku introduced her as his girlfriend. As they climbed on board, she found herself wondering where she would live. She'd felt like a millionaire getting the apartment near Gunhead's agency, with his separate living room and kitchen, the full bath and a closet, but middle-class apartments had minimal security. If you could believe it, Deku had planned on graduating UA and moving back in with his mom to her little government-subsidized apartment. A bomb threat forced her to move out instead, and he bought her a house in the countryside and hired a bodyguard. Then he'd wound up stuck in the dorm for an additional 2 months, sorting out complications of finding an appropriate residence in the city while the first years moved in. Ochako thought it was hilarious at the time. The newly famous Deku, still in the dorms, but it showed he'd been a high school student, completely unprepared. Now, she wondered where she was going to live. Mid-level sidekicks made good money, but not nearly enough to rent or buy a place like Deku's. Where would she go? Did she move in with him? The helicopter's not typically used for sightseeing, so it's more practical than comfortable inside. I hope you don't mind putting up with the equipment. Deku apologized. The helicopter was fully equipped for rescue support. Medical supplies were stored in drawers under the stretcher, and above the orange body bag, a narrow shelf holding the heart monitor, defibrillator, and oxygen machine obscured the windows. Deku dipped into the back to tuck in the baby bonanza bag with the ropes, hooks, and flotation devices. And the seats can get uncomfortable if you sit for too long, but hopefully it won't be that far, he added, folding down 2 seats with harnesses from the wall adjacent to the door. No, it's exactly what you need, said Ochako. We unbuckle and the door's right there so we can jump out like you do on TV. Concern flashed on Deku's face, quickly dispelled with a laugh. Right, that's about how it goes when the TV station wants to film something. We're not jumping today, though. Now on board, everything moved quickly. The pilot hopped up front, Deku secured the door, and noise-canceling headsets plugged into ports on the wall. Ochako buckled in, expecting a waiting period like when she'd flown commercial. Extended boarding or a line at the runway to build up the proper excitement about going on a date with Deku. But there was barely a minute before the deep drone of the rotor vibrated throughout the aircraft. The lift followed with such little warning that she snapped her head to Deku in surprise. Are we off already? Deku, busy adjusting his headset, showed no response, and Ochako realized her voice was inaudible over the noise. Well, they were off fast, like everything else between her and Deku in the past 24 hours. Little more than empty sky could be seen from the window above the stretcher, so Ochako twisted the other way around, craning her neck to see out behind her seat. Picking out landmarks was like a game of I Spy. The globe on top of All Might Tower and the peaceful banking center drifted into the skyline. Easy finds. Other spots, like the giant billboard near the train station, or the high-rise where Deku lived, appeared if you knew where to look. She braced herself for a certain view of Tokyo, only visible from the air. That of 2 craters, massive, overlapping like Shigaraki had carved out a Venn diagram in the middle of the city. The aerial photos of the aftermath had been visceral. The rubble and destruction spread throughout the city, but nothing was left in those craters. Whatever and whoever had been there were gone. Voids of dust, until it rained and filled with slop and mud. 2.5 years later, new houses, businesses, and schools disguised the craters, and shrubs and grass thrived in the empty space. But the city hadn't reclaimed it yet. The ground visibly dipped, and not every neighborhood blossomed in rebound, leaving a line to be traced around the crater's edge, where roads ended abruptly. Still, the redevelopment had come so far. It made Ochako wonder, what was she even worried about when the person sitting right beside her had been in the center of it, restructuring her whole life to deal with second-hand fame? Compared to what Deku had done, it was nothing. She was nothing, a silly girl blushing around him at school, getting petty and jealous when he talked to other girls, just because someone else had his attention. Deku had been through hell, while Ochako had locked herself in her dorm room and cried over a plushie. Enough of the window. Ochako turned back around in her seat, rubbing her neck where she'd strained for the view, and bumped that arm into Deku. As she looked to apologize, she found him leaning towards her with brows raised, eager to answer a question. His face was immediately over her shoulder, close enough to breathe on. The surprise was mutual, as both of them jumped and pulled away the full 2 inches their harnesses allowed. Leaning back, Deku's mouth moved to probably say sorry. He pointed at his headset and said something else, beyond Ochako's ability to decipher. She grimaced and pressed her hands together in apology that she couldn't hear him. He tilted his head, and he pointed at the headset again. Nope. Ochako shook her head. She couldn't hear a thing, and Deku's head tilted further, even more confused. Then she tried a bit of a scoot, and he happily caught on, also attempting to scoot. They smiled and nodded at each other at a 45-degree angle to not bump heads, adjusting an inch this way and that until it was abundantly clear that the narrow seats were designed to emergency transport as many heroes as possible, and there was no way to sit without Ochako's side pressed up against Deku. They settled in with their hips bumping, Ochako's shoulders squished against Deku's arm, and her ankles crossed to at least allow space for their legs. She tucked her shoulder bag under her feet, so she nestled her fingers into her skirt and pulled at the fabric instead, all too aware of their proximity. It occurred to her then, a good minute after Deku had been pointing at his headset, that he might have been trying to tell her to turn it on so they could have a conversation, but the moment had passed, and turning it on now would be awkward. Not to mention, she wasn't sure what, if anything, she would say. She stared ahead at the stretcher instead, letting the vibrating zippers on the orange body bag occupy her attention. Narrowing her gaze to a single zipper, it buzzed in place in no particular way, but opening her eye to watch the lot of them, every single zipper vibrated in unison to the helicopter drone. Ochako imagined that she and the zippers had something in common. Even if she couldn't explain it now, if she could see the big picture, some sense had to be made of the way she felt being here with Deku. Swelling and squeezing, energy spiking like a sugar rush, and stomach turning uneasy from too many sweets. A cloud-like lift and flutter, and an iron weight in her chest. And here came another thought. She'd have to get a new job. The publicity from dating Deku would interfere with business at a mid-ranked agency like Gunhead's. Sure, she'd been thinking it was time to move on, but having a countdown timer was a whole new thing. Not that her job had any significance when compared to the craters dug out of the earth, or that Ochako's weird feelings would straighten out if Deku was perfectly average. One of them moved a centimeter, and Deku's arm pressed lightly on her elbow. The seats really were small. Sitting itself wasn't uncomfortable, only the lack of space, but there weren't 10 people crammed in here. Ochako didn't have to be right next to him. She could unbuckle, move one seat over, and leave an empty spot between them. They'd be more comfortable and properly separated again, like they were supposed to be. The thought paused and lingered there like an ugly bruise, tender to the touch and in no hurry to go away. She didn't need to be in a hurry to get away from him, did she? Deku didn't seem to notice the elbow, or at least he didn't move. Ochako glanced his way. His eyes were addressed forward with no particular focus, and his hands were up by his shoulders, holding the straps of the harness like a backpack. His expression appeared neutral, but lightly glossed over with tension. Not worry, but he was certainly thinking about something. He had a million things to think about. Unlike her, recycling the same useless thoughts again and again and again. One minute she was certain she'd made up her mind, and the next, same questions came back again. Was she really supposed to be here? Wasn't Ochako supposed to let him go? But she didn't let him go. She told herself they were just friends and she had reasons to talk to him. There was more to life than hero work, and Deku would burn out if he isolated himself. He needed someone to talk to, someone who saw him as more than a face on a magazine, so she was there to listen. Was it because she worried about him? Or was it the dust-filled craters ingrained in her mind and a fear of losing him to the next disaster? Or was she afraid he'd just forget her? His busy, important life could quietly pull him away. So she fought to keep a place beside him. It was warm here, a patch of his skin on her skin. Deku noticed her. either from the elbow touching his arm, or he naturally noticed when she stared too long. His eyes shifted to meet hers, and the smile teased out on his lips was unmistakably for her. He really did have the best smile. For that moment alone, the thoughts in Ochiko's head decided they'd said enough. They stayed quiet as she reached across to Deku's closest hand. His expression shifted to curiosity as she deliberately peeled his fingers off the harness. Then he sat taller, mouth parting, eyes widening. Ochiko laced together their hands and pulled them both into her lap. His hand in hers, a piece of him, hers to touch, on purpose, because she wanted to. A reckless grin bubbled up from the chest. A pit of anxiety and doubt curdled in her stomach. Was this what it was supposed to feel like to touch him? Every strange, wonderful, and ugly thing boiling over all at once. His palm pressed against hers. The skin had toughened, forming a general thickness and a row of calluses under each finger. Roughness, though, had passed him by. The palms were sturdy but smooth, and maybe a hint on the sweaty side, too. As she'd expected, the fingers were a bumpy mess. He'd shattered every bone in his hands and arms in training exercises, fighting for no more than his own pride. That level of self-destruction wasn't normal. But of course, he wasn't normal. Because of that, he was prepared for the physical cost of fighting for people's lives. The misshapen bones and knotted joints fit oddly between her fingers, but it was perfect. Between the times he'd thrown himself in harm's way and the times she'd sat by him pretending her heart wasn't breaking because she wanted more, she'd never been so glad to hold someone's hand. And yet, it wasn't enough. One hand wasn't nearly enough. Ochiko folded her other hand around his as well, bringing 3 hands into her lap, a perfect little cocoon. The left hand pressed against his palm. The right ran over the scars and tendons on the back of his hand. But the back of his hand didn't feel like what she expected at all. She traced her fingers once again to be sure. The palms had hardened, but here? The natural texture of his skin was soft enough to kiss. There was no shortage of damage either. Scars cut straight across under his knuckles and up from around the wrist, but rough and hard, like you'd expect of a top-ranked hero. They glided under her fingertips like silk. Ochiko felt him twitch. Brief tightening of all his fingers at once. She'd drawn her thumb over a scar and shot a glance at Deku, wondering if it hurt. He'd hardly breathed, hardly moved more than his fingers since she'd taken his hand. The mouth, at least, he'd closed, but his eyes stayed wide, locked onto her lap. He didn't look like anything hurt. She brushed over the scar again, and prompting the same twitch, grinned. It tickled. Sometimes, Ochiko couldn't say if her thoughts were true and correct or strange one-off ideas. The feeling she had now, sinking back in whether she wanted it or not, wasn't one of those. Being able to sit here and hold Deku's hand wasn't how the story was supposed to go. She'd fallen in love years ago, but when she fell in love, she learned how ugly she could be. Irrational, selfish, jealous, clingy, embarrassing, incompetent, pathetic, and stupid. She loved him, but Ochiko, who loved Deku, behaved like a child. She couldn't root for that person, didn't want to be that person, and certainly didn't think she deserved to be loved back. So, of course, she felt so weird. She'd known that something was wrong this whole day. A light pressure cushioned her hand, where Deku had tightened his grip. Ochiko wasn't supposed to be here. She really wasn't. But as long as he held on to her, she was far too selfish to let go. The next best thing was to try to be a better person. No more crying and childishness. No more hurting when other people were suffering more. She needed to be there for Deku, not to be an extra burden, another person relying on him, taking whatever she could for herself. Maybe there was a way to carve out the rotten bits and throw them out. If not, then a place to hide them out of Deku's way. Deku's free hand appeared in Ochiko's peripheral vision, approaching her face. He was reaching for her cheek, she thought, but he proceeded over and around for her headset. He pressed 2 buttons, and his voice came through the earphones. "We're landing." Both of them had other things to do with their hands, and so she let him go as the helicopter touched down. The sensation stayed in her fingers, a toughened palm, and the back of the hand, inexplicably soft. Every nerve was awake and replaying the memory of his skin. As Deku went to unpack their stuff from the back, Ochiko climbed out of the helicopter first. A patch of cement had been set out for the landing pad, while the rest of their surroundings was lined with trees. The volcanic island climbed in a steep slope ahead of her, with pines, ferns, shrubs, and more covering the mountain in thick green. A single narrow road bended around the hill, the only other infrastructure in sight. Deku appeared at the helicopter door with a huge plastic trunk, easily big enough to require 2 people to carry. He squeezed around it and hopped onto the ground. "What's that? Rescue equipment?" asked Ochiko. "No, it's for our dinner," Deku said, rotating it lengthwise to fit better out the door. "I packed some folding chairs and such, and it ended up bulkier than I expected. Do you think you could get it?" "Oh, sure," Ochiko said and hopped over. She gave it a tap, and the trunk floated for easy transport. "Are we walking from here?" she asked, not seeing any other transportation. "Yeah, it's just 10 minutes or so up the road." Deku trailed off. Grammatically, the sentence ended, but he stilled in place and trailed off his words like he'd lost his thought. His eyes looked down, locked onto something. Ochiko traced them to her hands. The next second, he piped up with a breath. "You ready to go?" The pilot stayed behind with the helicopter, and Ochiko and Deku set out with the floating trunk. Just walking down the road, it felt like they'd left Tokyo for an entirely different world. Jagged rocks jutted from the slope where the ground wasn't covered in green, or flowers budded in pink, white, yellow, and blue. The air filled the lungs with untouched, natural ease, the clarity of the breath instilled with energy. And something had changed between her and Deku again, shaken and shifted in those minutes she sat holding his hand. She felt a pull like a magnet to touch him again. A mere 30-40 minutes, having only one hand wasn't anything close to enough when she'd spent so long standing by him, exchanging high fives and fist bumps and stepping out of his personal space. He walked ahead, pulling the trunk, often checking where she followed behind. The road slanted downward as they rounded a curve, and Deku pointed ahead to a dirt path that led into the trees. "You're all right walking and floating our stuff all the way here? It's not bothering you, right?" he asked as they stepped off on the path. "No, I can do way more than this. It's not a problem at all," said Ochiko. She did eye the trunk, though. "But really, it looks like you packed for a camping trip. It's all just for our dinner?" "Well, you're eating for 2, right?" Deku said. "2 people? If all this was food, you'd be feeding at least 50, 60. Like, imagine you packed this full of potatoes. You could probably survive a year in a bomb shelter," she said. "I guess you could. Maybe if you had oranges too, for vitamin C," Deku said. "And something else to balance out the nutritional needs, but I think potatoes keep for a long time, so it'd be a good base. You'd be really sick of them after a year, though." "Right? I'd never eat another for the rest of my life," said Ochiko. "Do you normally like potatoes?" "Yeah, they're good in soup and curry." "I was thinking of French fries." The deafening helicopter had power washed away the bustling noise of the city. Only now, walking through the trees, Ochiko's ears were waking up to the hush. The little noises came her way, a twig's crunch under her foot, scuffling as the trail sloped downward, a bird she couldn't see, chirping away a little melody. The timbre of Deku's voice was clear here, and Ochiko thought he had a nice voice. It was warm and subtly colored, like the green enveloping the trail. It seemed like they'd only been in the woods for a minute, when the trees thinned, the light brightened ahead, and they stepped out into the open air to see the ocean. The thick green of the hills ended here, breaking into rocky cliffs that dove into the water. The clear sky spread out as far as they could see, and color spilled freely wherever the sun touched. The hills, green, jutting rocks dark brown and deep maroon. The water ahead was a breathtaking blue, waves washing up on the shoreline first a vibrant turquoise and deepening as they returned to sea, rich cobalt, lush indigo, and opulent azure as the sun skimmed the surface like crystals bobbing in the sea. From the end of the trail, a staircase descended down the hill to a white sand beach. They paused here, taking in the view. Ochako had visited beaches many times before, but in comparison to the view here, it was like she'd only been looking at pictures. "What do you think?" Deku asked. "Wow, it's incredible," she said. There weren't any better words for the sight in front of her. Ochako turned to the person who brought her here. "You seriously planned all of this today?" "Mostly," Deku said. "I kind of thought when I came here last year that this would be a great place to bring someone, but it'd give off the wrong idea. The restaurant I ordered from, too, I was invited there for a business dinner, but it's not some place I could just bring someone to share, so when I decided to take you someplace special, I guess it all fell in place." "The wrong idea? Like he wanted to marry her?" Down the stairs to the beach, they unpacked the trunk like a treasure chest. He'd forgotten nothing. Folding chairs, check. Mosquito coil, lighter, check. An LED lantern, flashlights, mugs to be filled with green tea. The trunk doubled as a table, but if that wasn't enough space, he fit in a small folding table as well. There was a portable gas grill, purchased today, which they unpacked from its original plastic wrap. Deku thought a charcoal grill would make for a better flavor, but admitted he wasn't confident he could get it lit, so they snapped in the gas canisters. 3 lacquer boxes were stacked in a cooler, each one hand-painted with cherry blossoms. Since Deku hadn't been able to carry the cherry blossom box Ochako gave him this morning, he'd requested the restaurant's spring design instead of summer. The first box was rice and vegetables for grilling, of which Ochako was thrilled to see the giant matsutake mushrooms. Next, a box for squid and scallops. And finally, slices of premium wagyu laid out on a bed of shredded radish. And the chopsticks. Oh no, where were the chopsticks? Never mind, they found them. All the while, Deku had a big smile, excited to share everything. It wasn't just Ochako, after all. Look at this goofball. He thought he needed to fly her to an island to have a barbecue picnic on the beach in order for today to be special. He thought it was worth going out of his way to do this for her. They marveled at the scenery, took in the smell of salty air and grilled meat. He tapped her arm, reaching around for the sauces. They laughed at bad jokes about what would happen if he'd filled the whole trunk with potatoes. When they had everything set up, she reached for his hand again. He gave it a light squeeze in return. How had she ever thought she could move on, forget him, and find someone else? This was the exhilaration of free fall, falling head over heels. Gravity was in control, and Ochako was too busy holding Deku's hand to do anything to fix it. Nothing short of an absolute train wreck could pull her away from Deku now.